I'm Laura Clemons. I'm going to speak about disaster recovery through placemaking. This is specifically related to disasters as something that I feel is sorely lacking in the conversation. And as we move into Quito and we're focused on things like placemaking, urban design, walkable, transit-oriented places, places that people love, I think that also acknowledging the risk and hazards, the existing stresses that we live with every day and how they're exacerbated during times of disaster. So I wanted to focus in on what we're attempting to do here at the Placemaking Leadership Forum. They've pointed out 10 areas where placemaking can have the most transformative impact, and we are in the sustainability and resiliency session. So these would be the 10 areas. And in the sustainability and resilience, the way that it has been described is that these are ways that placemaking can have the largest influence on urban development patterns. And there's conversations around cutting emissions, supporting an environmental agenda, technological solutions, smart regulations and policy, dynamic human environments, environmental health, social and economic returns. Those are all really wonderful things. And I don't see disasters represented anywhere, or the impact that we go through when we're recovering from disasters, how we're strategically planning cities, how we're looking at how regulation permits us to be building still in really dangerous places where we know we shouldn't be, and then post-disaster to be able to put things right back where they were and just hope that it doesn't happen again. There is an excerpt from the Rockefeller Foundation, who is doing fantastic things around resiliency as it relates to the stresses that exist in cities and how shocks amplify and exacerbate those existing conditions. And so while I appreciate that they threw this in at the very bottom, it throws mention to shocks and stresses. It doesn't really, to me, go into a large enough amount of detail. So this is the thing that we're focused on in placemaking, right? We want to focus on fixing the really terrible things that exist, and we should, because this is what most people live in, right? I live in Austin, Texas, which is actively doing everything that it can to expand its interstate systems right through the middle of downtown, widen the highways to deal with traffic congestion. When you can simply Google, does that fix traffic? And it will say no, it doesn't for sure it doesn't, and they're doing it anyway. So we're taking livable places and we're making them actively unlivable, but we're not talking about evacuation zones. And this is not something that is just, oh, that's a Florida problem. This is something that only happens on the Gulf Coast. Living in Texas, I work with tiny rural communities that have this coming through their communities when Houston is evacuated. Okay, so there are evacuation zones that happen everywhere, and we're not talking about the way our roadways are supposed to function during extreme events. We want to focus on walkable places. Fantastic, let's do that. But let's also look at that exact same place and how it functions with an extreme rain event that we're having really regularly. So when we're working to change one, we solve for the other simultaneously. We want to look at hot new designs and TOD, right? That's really catchy and sexy, and that's the thing that we're working to build. Fantastic. And when we build these really wonderful, beautiful places, they end up under 10 feet of water because we didn't think about the fact that it was going to rain a lot. We're designing things for sunny days, and that's not where our thinking should be. So while we're doing one, we must simultaneously do the other. Let's address sprawl. Fantastic. Let's look at the way that urban sprawl has affected housing developments. Let's also take into consideration that many of those housing developments are underwater because we put them in low-lying areas. I'm sure that many of you are aware of what has happened in Louisiana just in the last month. Many of those houses that flooded weren't in the floodplain. And the floodplain is this beautiful thing that makes us feel really safe if we're on one side of the magic line. And if we're on the other side of the magic line, we're supposed to know better as a homeowner that our house that we bought was in the floodplain. And someone regulated that a developer could build there. And there's no responsibility put on the government who subsidized the building there, the developer who then built it. It's all on the homeowner that you should have known better that your house would be underwater. Sometimes we do it backwards. We focus on the thing itself, like a tornado, while not looking at what we're going to do with the neighborhoods that we have to put back. Thousands of houses every month are disappearing in this country. That missing middle class that we focus on, that we already don't have enough housing for, this is what's happening to it. And you say, fantastic, let's look at resiliency. Again, this is a Rockefeller Foundation. It's the ability for us to survive, adapt, and grow in the face of the existing daily stresses and the shocks as they come at us. How can we withstand the catastrophic events? As we're building beautiful places, how do we achieve both? You say, Laura, disasters don't happen in my neighborhood. That's not a problem that we have. So, did anyone have any idea that there is a disaster happening every 3¼ days? A federally declared disaster. This isn't like it was bad. It was so bad that the federal government had to step in. This is where I feel like no one's paying attention because it's not covered by the media. We don't know that while we're sitting in this room that there are neighborhoods that are being flooded, they're on fire, there's cataclysmic events happening in this country that we have no idea about. If I ask you guys, how many disasters do you think has happened in your state this year? What states do we have represented in here?
British Columbia.
Let's go south of the border, since that's where I'm most familiar with. Is there anyone?
California.
So California, you guys know that you're one of the high-risk zones, right? And that's what most people, I live in Texas, right? Texas and California, it's always on fire or mudslides or, it's always a disaster. However, when we look at federal declarations, by year, we're already up to 79 in the United States this year, and that's not even a heavy year. But the disasters as they're happening are becoming bigger. They're not the things that get a fancy name. It's not a Sandy or a Katrina, right? It's just rain on Wednesday that devastates 100,000 houses. 100,000 housing units are gone in Louisiana, and these were not wealthy neighborhoods. So what are we going to do, and how do we solve for those? And here's your broken down by your state. If you're from the U.S., this is looking at how many disasters you're having. Oklahoma, almost 3 disasters a year. And again, I think that most people don't recognize the sheer volume and the amount of money that we're spending. So as architects, developers, planners, educators, nonprofit individuals, when disasters happen, there are billions of dollars that are flowing into these each year to rebuild these communities, right? We're trying to chip away at the tiny thing with neighborhoods and communities and cities to make them better, when oftentimes entire neighborhoods are gone and we could be starting over and we could be putting it back better, and there's definitely money flowing into it. So those are the shocks, and then let's shift back to the stresses that exist. Infrastructure is at an all-time low in this country. Infrastructure grades, the grades that we assign to things. So if you ever, I love Googling, if you are to Google the thing called bridge collapse, in 0.4 seconds, you can get almost 13 million examples of bridges collapsing. That should be startling, a little bit scary. Then you have, we see this a lot. This is everywhere in Texas, this is in Alabama, this is in New York, this is in New Jersey. All across the United States and around the world, you have infrastructure collapsing under the stress of extreme rain events, earthquakes, etc., mudslides. So how do we shift in going into keto, and how do we start to look at how hazard mitigation can make great places, can create those public spaces that we desire to have in the places that people love? So it's hazard mitigation, which is used in one realm. Hazard mitigation is a thing that has a lot of money coming into it after a disaster. How does that meet sustainability? How does that meet your infrastructure projects? And how does that meet planning?